Hi, my name is Paul Friedman. I founded the Marriage Foundation, and today's topic is about marriage counseling sessions, and that includes couples counseling. So we're going to create an overview for you so you know what you can expect, what you can't expect, what will happen. We're going to unpack this so you understand it from the different points of view of the participants, how everyone is affected, and what should come. So let's begin with why you want to go to marriage counseling. Obvious. You're not happy with what's going on in your marriage. You want help. You seek out a professional. And there are some marriage counselors out there who are really good. Unfortunately, not as many as we would like. It's not as consistent. It's not a hard science like medicine, so you have to understand your selection of a marriage counselor is very important. Let's now talk about what you want. You want to be happier. Things are going wrong. Your marriage is supposed to produce happiness. Isn't that why you got married? Isn't that the very underlying first and foremost reason you got married is because you want to be happier. Now there's sub reasons too. For instance, you want to have children, you want to have a family, you want to fit into your community. There's a lot of sub reasons, but they all come back to I want to be happier in life. Okay, great. Therefore, you know that somehow your marriage got off track. It's not producing happiness. And naturally, you want to be happy. So that's why you're going. What would you expect? You would expect to go into a session, sit down, do the pleasantries as quickly as you can, obviously, because you want to progress. You want to leave that very first session with a couple of things. One, you want a direction. You want to start putting one foot in front of the other foot in a direction that's going to bring you to more happiness. Simple. The other thing that you want is you want to leave that session with some more happiness. You want to have resolved at least some issues or have begun to resolve some issues right away. You're not going in for a diagnosis. The diagnosis is simple. We're unhappy. Let's get happy. Now let's talk about perspective, the points of view that are within the session. There's 3 of you. So there's the counselor, there's you, and your spouse. Now, if you're the person who initiated the counseling, you're sort of at the forefront of expectations. Unfortunately, that usually translates into complaint about your spouse. Also, because of the innate dynamic of your drive to survive, and I don't mean to go over your head, but all of us are largely controlled by our drive to survive. So it puts us in a position of fearfully protecting our position. Well, when you do that in a marriage, your marriage is only 2 people in a closed space. So if things are going wrong, the mind is going, it's his fault, it's her fault. And the other one is going, no, it's not my fault, it's your fault. This is a dynamic, and now what's going on is you're bringing this into a session where that underlying subconscious dynamic exists. You cannot escape it. It's impossible. I used to be a professional mediator. That means that people came to me to get a divorce without going through the courts. So I would line everything out objectively. I would help them with the separation of community property. I would help them with the separation of their children. It breaks my heart now to even talk about it. And then I turned around and I became a marriage saver. But even in those sessions where people were aligned with the idea of getting a divorce, there was still it's not my fault, it's their fault dynamic. It's very difficult to overcome. Another piece of that you have to be very mindful of is that there's a tendency for each of you and your spouse, to get the moderator, in this case the therapist or counselor, to be on your side. This is completely against creating happiness. It won't work, because what it means is there will be a winner. You're hoping you and your spouse will see all the things they're doing wrong, but there's also, when there's a winner, there's a loser. Your spouse, and they're going to feel abused. I cannot tell you how many times people come to us at the Marriage Foundation and say, we tried counseling, but it didn't work because all that happened was we ended up getting into more conflicts. It's not unusual. Should be never, because the counselor should, and this again goes back to your expectations of this, should be that you will leave the session with more harmony than you went in with. But it's difficult. It's very difficult because the dynamics of human nature. Now let's take a look, and we're going to get into exactly what happens in a session, but let's take a look at the perspective, the point of view of the therapist. This is important. Here you have someone who became a psychologist first, Western psychology, which means it's part of their teachings that they do not consider the soul to be who you are. And yet you are the soul. I mean, in your marriage, you're considered to be soulmates, not just married. But the psychologist has a different perspective about that. So they're looking at, and this is Western psychology, they're looking at what's wrong? Why do you say that? How does that make you feel? It's like they want to get to the bottom of something that there is no bottom to. That's typical. However, much worse than that, and much more dangerous, and much more usual, and I know because I've trained many, many therapists into how we approach it, and before I train them, I ask them some questions. I screen them out. And I want you to know that most therapists are in it for the money. Who isn't? We have to survive, right? So what will happen is that underlying even the best of them, they have this desire to keep you coming back because you're their ticket. They don't have a regular job. You're how they make money. Yeah? So this is one of the unfortunate aspects of marriage counseling. Now, the other thing that you want coming out of the session is you want to know more. You want to have the code broken. You got off the tracks. Why did I get off the tracks? Why did we get off the tracks? What are we doing wrong? More importantly, what can I do once I've learned, once I have fixed my end of the marriage, my part of the marriage? What do I need to know about marriage so I can keep it going? And no therapist knows. What can I tell you? We had a very cool therapist who was part of the Marriage Foundation. Unfortunately, he passed away. The first time I met him, we sat down and he was going through how he handled his clients. And I said, Paul, his name was Paul too. I said, Paul, you don't need us. You own this. You totally get it. What did he get? He got that the key to marriage happiness long term is education. You need to understand marriage. I'm going to take that a little further. You need to understand marriage because that's where you are. This is the best I can do for a heart. This is your sacred space of marriage. You also need to understand yourself. If you're a woman, you have to understand how you're different from a man. Even more importantly, how does your gender impact you psychologically? What is this tremendous difference that makes you a woman, not just physiologically, but emotionally, psychologically? What are those key factors? Because that's what your husband, if you're the woman, is attracted to or was attracted to. You have to understand, therefore, yourself as a woman, if you're a woman, yourself as a man, if you're the man, and you have to understand each other. You have to understand how their gender affects them. So now you have a few things. You have to have an understanding of marriage, what's really entailed, what is that contract really? You have to understand your husband or your wife based on their gender, not just on their idiosyncrasies that are personal. And you have to understand yourself. How do you see things because of your gender? How do you react to things because of your gender? You also have to understand how the mind works. You have to be able to control that mind. And this is something they never offer you in sessions. You have to understand the mind. You don't go to a doctor who doesn't understand, because you're relying on them to fix that part. So if you have pneumonia, you want someone who's a specialist in lungs so they could deal with it. They don't even have to explain to you what they're doing. They give you the medication, fine. But when you're in a marriage, you need to understand your mind, because your mind is yours. You own it. You possess it. You're in charge of controlling it, so you have to understand it. So here it is. You have to understand marriage. You have to understand you. You have to understand your spouse. You have to understand what makes a marriage work. That's what your expectation should be going into a session. Now, what happens when you go into a session? I have to tell you, I have a lot more experience with this than I wish I had, because when I was a divorce mediator, I would hear the stories. Almost always the same story with a little shade of this or that. You go in, first session, 45 minutes. You sit down, okay, tell me what's going on. That's what the therapist always says. Of course, that makes total sense. What's going on? Unfortunately, what that does is it sets up two people who have to explain from their perspective what's going on for them. What happened to the unity? So guess where I got most of my clients when I was a divorce mediator? I got them, virtually all of them, from therapists who failed. Because immediately you will be separated out dynamically just because you're being asked what's going on. Because the therapist will ask one of you, and that becomes the lead person who answers first. And then the other one of you will answer. Well, if the other one is passive and says, okay, that sounds about right, how are you going to get anywhere? And I'm going to ask you another question. How is that going to even help you get anywhere? You explain what's going on. Okay, so maybe you hit it from a very high level and you go, well, we're not communicating well. What the hell does that even mean? That can mean anything. It doesn't help. A session that doesn't begin with education is not going to help you. When I started my sessions, when I first started healing couples, because I didn't really know how to work with couples, and it got to the point of where I wouldn't work with couples anymore because of that dynamic I mentioned previously. I would only meet with individuals. Yeah. My first instructions, though, when I was working with couples was number one, we're done fighting. No more arguing. Done. Complete. Agreed? Okay, but what? Doesn't matter but what. Doesn't matter your what ifs. We're done arguing. That has to be the case. You cannot argue your way into harmony, right? How can you do that? You fight your way into wars, which end up in divorces. So that's the dynamic of what's going on. There are many other aspects of it, but the bottom line is this. The bottom line is, even if you're going to use a marriage counselor instead of our courses, which I think are far, far superior, start by reading enough about marriage, like basic marriage. I've written 2 books. They're written to sort of expose marriage. It gives you a look down into marriage point of view while telling you how to improve. Many people, before I started the courses, used the books to completely save their marriage. They just didn't know. And we don't learn these things in school. So you gotta know this stuff. I'm sorry. And I honestly, if I thought there were other books out there that really explain marriage, I would tell you. Because my whole thing is to help you. Speaking of which, if you need help, and I'm pretty much wrapped up, hopefully you got a good sense of what's going to happen in a marriage counseling session. But if you want some more advice, you want some suggestions, you have a particular question, you know, at the Marriage Foundation, we have counselors who respond to these questions for free. Free! So there's going to be a link in the box. Write to them if you'd like to. If you want to take a look at our books, you can. It's on the website. If you want to learn more about the course, which I think is incredible, I'm going to also include a link to that where I explain it in thorough detail so you understand exactly. And from that, and trust me on this, if you watch that video, you're going to learn more about marriage than you've ever known, just watching that video. I mean, it's really cool stuff. Okay, so I'm going to wrap this up here. Don't want to oversaturate you. Love and blessings to you. Oh, I left out one thing. If you want to interact with me directly and personally, the best, if not the only way, is to leave a comment. Also along those lines, if you think this is useful, I think it's really useful, share it. Let people know. Put it on YouTube or whatever, not YouTube, but Facebook or whatever social media. I'm really not on top of all that. We have a nice support department here. So love and blessings to you. Love and blessings to your spouse. Love and blessings to your family. And don't give up. Everything's going to work out. It will.